The 2008 election of Barack Obama was filled with great promise. Finally, a person of color was in the White House, someone who would understand the experience of being a minority in America and end the injustice perpetrated against them. But 4 years later, for some, that promise appears to be ringing hollow. For more on that, we're joined in New York by Fredrick Harris. He's professor at Columbia University and the author of The Price of the Ticket: Barack Obama and the Rise and Decline of Black Politics. And Professor Harris, as I welcome you to TVO tonight, before we get into the nub of your argument, perhaps you could just tell us, did you vote for Barack Obama last Tuesday?
Oh, I can't tell you who I voted for, but I tell you, I didn't vote for Mitt Romney.
Okay.
So I'll tell you that.
Well, let's put it this way then. Are you pleased that the president was reelected?
I am extremely pleased because I think the alternatives would have been a disaster for African Americans and other people of color, and also other marginalized communities in the United States. So I'm ecstatic that the president indeed did win, and won rather decisively, at least in the Electoral College.
Having said all that, here's what you wrote in the New York Times a couple of Sundays ago. I want to read an excerpt of it now for our viewers. The Obama presidency has already marked the decline rather than the pinnacle of a political vision centered on challenging racial inequality. The tragedy is that black elites, from intellectuals and civil rights leaders to politicians and clergy members, have acquiesced to this decline, seeing it as the necessary price for the pride and satisfaction of having a black family in the White House. And I'm wondering, for starters, what kind of blowback you've had since those words were published in the New York Times.
Well, I've had some blowback, but not as much blowback rather than I had when I published a piece in the Washington Post in June that was titled, unfortunately, "Still Waiting for the First Black President." But I think there is some recognition within black communities that there hasn't been enough attention focused on issues that are particular to African American communities. As I said in that New York Times piece, there have been very important milestone pieces of legislation, particularly around health care reform, that will go a long way in assisting African Americans in the long run. I don't know if your viewers know, but a fifth of African Americans are uninsured in the United States. However, there are issues particular to black communities that have not been addressed by the president. And so what we have had here is what I would describe as the moving the goalpost argument. There were people, supporters of the president, who said when he ran in 2008, well, we can't raise these issues right now, just wait until he gets reelected or gets elected. So that's moving the goalposts. Once he got elected, there were people making arguments because there were so many other things that were on the table, policy issues that were on the table. People were making the claim, well, just wait until the midterm election. The goalpost moves again. And so we heard this year the goalpost being moved again with people saying, well, wait till he gets reelected. And so thank God, you know, the clock didn't turn out in this political game, because I think African Americans and black leaders have been more cheerleaders on the sideline and not in the political game. So now we're at halftime. We have a second term, and so I hope African American voters and leaders suit up and put issues that they think are important on the table.
If I can use your words, what issues did you want the president to suit up on in his first term that you didn't see any progress on?
Well, one issue that the president actually promised, and many African American voters or leaders haven't held his feet to the fire on this, when he was a candidate running behind Hillary Clinton in 2007, he made one of the most boldest proposals I've seen from a presidential candidate on criminal justice reform. He gave a speech at the historic black college, Howard University. And what he promised was a federal level racial profiling act. He promised that he would give loan forgiveness to law students who became public defenders to level the playing field for defendants, people who are marginal, like African Americans and Latinos, and poor whites, quite frankly, who couldn't afford a defense, he would have loan forgiveness for those law students. He was also said that he would encourage states to do away with the death penalty. So actually, I would like him to come through on some of the promises that he made in 2008 when he ran for president.
Having said that, if the Democratic Party is going to be the recipient of 90 to 95% of the black vote, is it any wonder they take it for granted?
Well, absolutely, and this is the heart of my book, a part of the argument of my book. Not necessarily that I don't think African Americans should to sort of start a mass exodus to the Republican Party, because that would make no sense on a substantive from a substantive policy substantive perspective. But I do think that, like other key constituencies within the Democratic Party, because gay and lesbian activists, voters who vote consciously on that issue, they're not going to make a mass exodus either, but they pressure the president, they set an agenda. And so if there's going to be any movement on these policy areas, African Americans are going to have to do what other key constituencies of the Democratic Party do, including Latinos, around immigration reform. They're going to have to pressure the president rather than what they've been doing in the last 4 years, protecting the president from his right-wing detractors.
We know whatever problems Americans in general have in the United States, the black community suffers even more. For example, unemployment rate probably twice as high among blacks as among the general population. Almost 1 million black men in prison. To what extent do you think the president needs to speak more directly to those issues in his second term than he did in his first term?
Yeah, I think he absolutely has to. And just to put a perspective on that point, President Barack Obama has spoken less as a Democrat, as a Democratic president on racial issues than any president since 1961. And in fact, he's spoken less on issues of the poor and on issues of poverty in State of the Union addresses in his first 2 years than any president since the 1940s. So what we have is complete silence around these issues. Racial inequality and inequality more generally within the United States is still a persistent problem. And so not only do we need to see policies pushed on these fronts that would tackle these issues, but we need the president to use the bully pulpit in many ways to dramatize issues like criminal justice reform. But again, I think this is only a halfway proposition. I think in order for this to happen, because this is the fundamentals of how the American political system works, African American voters and those who are sympathetic more generally to issues of to addressing racial inequality will have to pressure the president into doing it and set a very clear agenda about what he should be doing for the next 4 years. You
just referenced 1961, which of course was the year JFK was elected, and I want to make a comparison here for you and then get your view on this. They said that Kennedy could win in 1961 even though he was Catholic because he wasn't that Catholic. And I wonder whether you see Barack Obama as a president who's frankly not that black.
Well, I don't want to get into questions about how black he is or more or less. I think those issues are not important, because I think what's really important is that the question should be not what Barack Obama, the black president, is doing for black voters, but the question should be, what is Barack Obama doing for the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party? No other constituency in this country this past week, even if they are on the right, on the Republican side, gave 94 to 95% of their vote to one particular candidate. And so something has to give. There has to be some reciprocal relationship that must develop here. And I think black leaders and black public intellectuals as well need to dramatize these issues, need to come up with the issues that are important that they see that the president could address. So again, I don't want to get into sort of if Barack Obama is black enough, because I don't think that's really the core issue here.
Fair enough. What if we look at the issue of power, though? Washington understands power. And if you look at Washington now, you've got a Senate that is completely, it seems, ineluctably, just gridlocked. And you've got a House of Representatives that the Republicans still control. And he's in his second term, and you know that 2 years into the second term, people are going to start to look at him as a lame duck. So is he still in trouble on that scorecard?
Actually, you seem like you actually read my book or saw one of my interviews I gave previously, because this is exactly my point. And I bring up this point about, is Barack Obama, as the first black president, will he be a hollow prize for African Americans? hollow on the substantive side because, again, I think there's great symbolic pride that people of African ancestry have in the United States and throughout the world for the election of Barack Obama. And so I'm wondering for African Americans in setting an agenda that they missed those first 2 years when there was a Democratic president and both houses of Congress were dominated by the Democrats. Because what we have now will be possibly the continuation of the past 2 years because the status quo is still intact. And so what I hope, I'm a praying man. So what I'm praying will happen is that, in fact, in the second midterm, that the American public will be so fed up that they're going to vote in Democratic majorities in both houses, and that perhaps the president's greatest achievements, particularly around issues around racial inequality, because I think he did great on the universal issues around health care. Perhaps those 2 years when he's a lame duck, we can get some sort of movement with Democratic majorities in Congress.
We'll keep watching. Fredrick Harris, it's good of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you, and I'll keep praying.
Good enough.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.